Good morning, all. First of all, thank you very much for coming. I'm Russell Fryer of Mercia Technologies. You'll be very pleased to know that you've only got me for a few minutes just to do the introductions and hand over to the real mainstream speakers. With any presentation, as I'm sure you're aware, there's the standard compliance slide. There will be tests on this at the end of the presentation, so please make sure you read it fully before we go on. This presentation does come with CPD accreditation, and thank you very much to Vilma for organising that. Now, from my previous involvement, they like to have some nice learning objectives before for CPD. So, just to go through those, want to at the end of this come out better informed and understand MiFID II and particularly its implications for IFAs and the way that due diligence is carried out. Things are changing and it's important that we get a handle on this. Secondly, understand and learn about independent reviews. There have been cases I've certainly come across in the past where advisors said, well, this one got an 84 and everyone else got an 83, so I put all my business with the 84. Well, we perhaps need to understand the actual process and how independent reviews can fit into that space. And finally, consider some of the risk mitigation techniques within various EIS offerings. So hopefully we'll come back to this at the end of the presentation, and if these guys have done a good job, then we can put a tick in all of those boxes, hopefully. The presenters, you're going to first of all have Mark Brownridge. Very pleased that Mark's joined us. Mark, if you don't know him, is Director General of the EISA. Mark will be handing over to Richard Angus. And will you be presenting as well, Vilma? And Vilma from Hardman & Co., covering the independent research side of things. Then Paul Mattick, Dr. Paul Mattick, who is Head of Investor Relations and Sales at Mercia. And then I will just try and bring things together at the end. So first of all, once again, thank you very much for coming in what's a pretty miserable day out there. And without further ado, I'll hand over to you, if I may, Mark.
For choosing the wettest day of the year to choose a seminar. Thanks very much. So yeah, my name's Mark Brownridge. I'm Director General of the EIS Association. So I'm going to talk to you today about using independent reviews, or rather I'm not actually. What I want to do is just go back a couple of steps, because at the end of the day, what is an independent review? It's basically a piece of research and due diligence. So I just want to go back a couple of paces and look at the whole context of research and due diligence and where this stuff fits into the bigger picture of how we do this stuff. So trying to look at why it's important to do research and due diligence, trying to look at what the difference is between research and due diligence, because I think there is quite a big difference between those two things. I think it's important to understand how that works. And then thirdly, just try and use my experience as a former IFA, so I used to be head of research for a financial planning firm, Mazars Financial Planning. And when we started to look at this stuff, when we started to look at our research and DD processes, we were pretty infrequent, pretty inconsistent in what we did. It's pretty much done on an ad hoc basis, really. So we went from doing not a lot to doing quite a lot, and that brought some real positive benefits to the business and, more importantly, to clients as well. So I think it's important to try and share that with you guys as well. So one of the first things I want to do is talk about, and try and steal everyone else's thunder, actually, because I'm sure they're going to talk about it as well. And let's talk about TR16-1, which is the paper that the FCA did back in a year or so ago. So the headline from this, and again, try not to steal too much thunder from these guys, is that the headline figure was that the primary cause of poor client outcomes was poor DD processes. So before we undertake any research or due diligence, it's important to understand why we're doing it and what we're trying to achieve. And one of the things we did at Mazars was trying to get this 5-stage process in place. There we go. So this really helped us to kind of set the agenda for where we're going with our R&D processes. So the key jumping off point for any R&D is basically the current and future strategy and vision of the business. This sets the scope for everything else that follows and ensures that the R&D work is then aligned to your strategic goals. For a researcher, there's no point doing a whole host of work, trying trying to put a load of effort in, trying to find the next big product or proposition that your clients and your planners might want to use, because all that work can go to waste if that's not aligned to what the strategic goals of the firm are. So you can waste a lot of time doing that stuff, but make sure it fits in with what the wider business is trying to do, what the wider business is trying to achieve. When we joined Mazars, or when I joined Mazars, I should say, we did very little EIS planning, and actually what drove it forward was doing a client segmentation exercise that made us realise we had the client base that was appropriate for this stuff. So we had clients with the right age, who had the right assets and liabilities, who had the right tax liabilities, who had the right risk profile, most importantly. As I say, that really drove us towards doing a lot more work in this area. So we need to have a business case, we need to be able to crunch some numbers to prove that there's some new business that will come in from all this stuff, and to ensure that the senior manager have buy-in before we go ahead. So the next stage to help deliver those strategic goals is to create service propositions. Now, service proposition is often an area of advice, such as at retirement, or in this instance, tax-efficient investing. And in order to define the outcome we're seeking to achieve here, it's important to establish measurable objectives. Once we establish those objectives, we can then set a criteria of how we want to achieve those objectives. So, for example, one of the outcomes we might want to see achieve for a tax-efficient investment proposition might be that you ensure that you get your clients' tax certificates back very quickly to them so they can get their tax relief quickly and efficiently. A measurable objective, therefore, would be to ensure that clients get their EIS-3 certificates back within a certain number of months, and that'll be up for you guys to choose what that number of months will be. It might be 3, it might be 6, it might be 9, it might be 12. Again, it's your choice to choose what that X number of months is. So to achieve that objective, one of your research criteria might be that you select only EIS single companies or funds that have a track record of delivering EIS-3 certificates within that specific time span. By doing this, you can really quite quickly and quite easily filter down the whole product universe, which might be 30 or 40 products, into a product panel or a selection of products that fit your criteria. So that might be 2 or 3 EISs out of 30 that fit that criteria. It might be 10 or 15, but at least you've chosen your own set of criteria for choosing that panel. So research and due diligence is only useful when we conduct it against this backdrop. Every firm, and there's probably 15, 20 firms different in the room here, will have their own idea of how to get those, what their strategy will be and what they want to focus on, to whom they want to focus it to, and how they want to deliver it. But once identified and communicated, R&D can be aligned accordingly. So research and due diligence in a financial planning context are often taken to be the same thing, but in my view, there is a difference. So I think it's really important to try and flesh that out a little bit. So research should assess how the characteristics and features of a product can be used to help a firm deliver those defined outcomes we just talked about. And for me, for EIS, it should probably cover these things here. So there's probably 10 or 12 things, different things there. I'm not going to go through all of them one by one, but just try and pick out a couple of them. Management experience, I think that's always important. So people who have been there, have done it before, can show you that they've got the experience in that particular sector. That's always a real key indicator when looking at an EIS fund or investee company. Downside protection and upside potential, two conflicting things there in some ways. So for many EISs, they're trying to just mitigate the risks, they're trying to downplay the risks as much as possible. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got EISs that are trying to go for super growth and make as much returns as possible. Again, for a firm, you need to decide kind of which end of that spectrum you're going to be, whether you're going to be a little bit of both, whether you're going to be in the middle, whether you're going to be one end or the other ends. But you need to talk to your clients, talk to your planners, and see what you're comfortable doing and advising in that area. Deal flow is always a big one. If you're investing in a fund particularly, and that fund only has 1 or 2 areas of deal flow, you need to think what happens if that deal flow gets cut off. Where they're going to go to next? Do they have anywhere else where they can get investee companies? Are they still going to be able to make good investments on behalf of you and your clients? Track record's always a big one as well. So again, have they been there? Have they done it? Have they had, more importantly, have they got out of an EIS before? One of the biggest criticisms you can have for EIS funds is that you go into a fund, you sit in it 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years, and all of a sudden you can't get your client's money out. So you need to have EISs that have a track record of returning money to clients. Due diligence then is an analysis of an organisation delivering the said products to consider whether it's a viable commercial entity. At its most basic level, the risk is that the organisation can't do what it said it would do and defaults in some form. So due diligence, therefore, attempts to identify whether that risk exists and to what extent. It also covers potential conflicts of interest between the parties involved, also including the practice between yourselves and supplier firms. So research should be, research and due diligence should be a package, a belt and braces approach. Research looking at the product, due diligence looking at the product provider. This is a risk-based approach that should then give you a best solution to your desired outcomes that we talked about earlier, while also minimising your business risk. Good research and due diligence helps you ensure you're choosing the right product, both for your client and for your business. So you need to be confident you're asking the right questions for your clients and can demonstrate back to the regulator how you made your decision. You need to make it crystal clear to anyone who cares to ask the question how you made your decisions and what the evidence you have to back it up. So you've got a proven audit trail. By doing this, our research and diligence is undertaken within a risk framework, and risk to both yourselves and your clients is contained and minimised. If things do go wrong, well-documented R&D will enable you to justify the decisions you made at the time and should be able to reduce both reputational and financial risk. And again, just for an example, when we were at Mazars, when we started to do EIS on any kind of grand scale, initially we were doing it with just one provider. So we looked at that and thought, well, hang on, this is a reputational risk, there's a concentration risk here, there's a provider risk here. So we started to move out a little bit and try to have more providers on our panels, trying to encourage our planners to invest their clients' money in different EISs. And thankfully, we did have a couple of EISs a couple of years ago that didn't go very well, should we say. So they lost clients' money, they obviously weren't very happy, they're coming to us asking questions. Actually, thinking back, none of them complained because we managed to set expectation levels at the right level for clients. But the point being, we had probably 7 or 8 clients who weren't happy at that time. If we'd have just done it with one provider, and that particular provider, we probably have had 30, 40 clients who weren't very happy, and we probably would have had complaints. So we managed to try and ring fence some of that risk, and also at the same time, obviously, reduce our reputational risk, therefore. But it's not just about risk also, it's also about good business practice. An effective R&D process should leave both your clients and you in a better position than before the process was undertaken. So this might include a reduction in risk. It should also include other areas such as improved efficiencies, improved processes, improved client experiences, and hopefully lower costs also. Clearly, all of these will relate back to the objectives we talked about earlier and the desired outcomes we're seeking to achieve. So research and development is a full circle 360 exercise that steps back and looks at the provider in its entirety and not just in isolation. The benefits are tangible both to your clients and for your own business. Finally then, just want to look at some of these areas, which are pretty much a do and don'ts for advising in this area. That's the last one. So hopefully this kind of acts as a checklist, and when we talked about independent reviews earlier, this is where we'll probably come into to looking at this most openly. So the first thing, if I can encourage you to do anything, it would be to do it yourself. Don't just rely on independent reviews, as good as most of them are. You need to, as I say, set your own criteria. You need to understand why you're doing this stuff. You need to ask the questions that you want to ask. Otherwise, you just get someone else's opinion and you don't get your own opinion. You know what your clients are, you know your financial planners are, and what questions they want to ask. So ask your own questions, do your own questionnaires, and get them to fill them in. Don't rely on their questionnaires also. Many EIS funds these days will send out their own questionnaire. Please don't rely on those. Please ask your own questions at that point. Second point is don't rely on third parties. So yeah, there's some really good reviewers out there. Hardman's, for example, Annenbridge, MyCap, Martin Churchill. They do some really good analysis. There's some really good opinions in there. They can't just rely on their opinions. Russell talked about scoring earlier. I know this is a touchy subject in the independent review market, whether to score or not to score. But the point is, you can look at a score. I wouldn't rely on a score. The more important this issue is to look at the methodology of that scoring so you understand how that number came about. Because a number is only a number if you know understand how it came about. I'm an Ipswich Town fan. I see a lot of 0-0 draws at Ipswich. It's pretty boring most of the time. But if I haven't seen the game, I don't understand how the score came about. So it's similar in the independent research area as well. We've talked about set your own criteria. So you need to understand what you're trying to achieve with this stuff and what criteria you're looking at. To give you an example there, talking about tax relief and tax certificates, that's just one criteria. You probably want to think about having 5, 10, 15, 20 such criteria to try and give you that panel that we talked about earlier. Finally there, don't follow the crowds. So yeah, again, it's very easy just to pick out the biggest names in this industry and try and invest with those guys in the hope that they'll give you the biggest returns. The likelihood that they won't, you need to do more than one, try and get a portfolio of this stuff. most of the analysis that I see says that if you can invest across up to sort of 10 or 12 different EIS, or certainly different EIS companies, then you're getting more of a portfolio effect. There's under-correlated risks. You're reducing the risk, certainly getting no money back, and hopefully getting some significant returns back. Ask the questions they don't want you to ask. Again, as we talked about earlier, they'll provide you with questions that they want you to know, but you need to ask those questions that you want to know. So often providers, particularly EIS providers, don't like being asked about track record, for example, or performance. So that's probably a good starting point to quiz them on. We talked about not relying on one manager, try and spread it around a little bit. There's some great managers out there, but yeah, don't just do it with one person, or don't just do it with the big boys, try and spread it around. Keep it under review. So yeah, times change, particularly in the EIS market as we get towards tax year end, for example. EIS funds tend to fill up quite quickly, particularly the popular ones. So you need to keep looking at this stuff, keep checking that this is appropriate for your client base. Are they still want to invest in this area? Are they looking at different areas they want to invest in? So just really try and keep it all under review. And then finally, they're trying to keep an audit trail. So again, this is really for the regulator, for your own business. Again, you can, if anyone does ask you questions of why you're recommending this particular EIS fund, or why you're doing the processes that you're doing, you have an audit trail there. It's all on your system, probably in your back office system, that you can explain to someone that this is how you did it and this is why you did it. And if a complaint does come back in a couple of years' time, then hopefully you should be able to justify that. And that's pretty much it. Any questions before I go?
Well, you're going to send this through to us?
If you so wish. There's only 4 slides there, so it should be very easy. I can send you my notes as well, which is probably a better thing to send you, because that sets out that 5-stage plan and gives you that in more detail, so that'll probably help.
So it's actually being videoed as well, so
No problem. I'll pass on.
Thank you, Mark.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name's Richard Angus, and I'm here with my colleague Vilma from Hardman & Company, and we're just going to address a few objectives this morning with you and talk about the regulatory environment, the work that we do to give you an example, an understanding of who we are and how we approach the market, and then we will basically have a summary up at the end and basically repeat a lot of what Mark's already said, but let's get to that point when we get there. So one of the objectives is to be better informed about the growing regulatory influence on advisors' lives, and the way that we look at MiFID II, and we're not regulatory consultants, but what we are people who understand where the regulator is going to go. And one of the big issues that we come up across a lot of times is people don't really understand what MiFID II is trying to get to. So there are a number of things. The first thing is that MiFID II as a whole is trying to increase competition in the financial services market. That's really what's behind it. The logic being, if you have more competition, you get better pricing, you get better services to the ultimate customer, the client, who is the investor, and it should raise professional standards. Now, to do all this, you need a certain amount of transparency and clarity. And one of the issues with that is that you then have to put a lot of procedures in place, which causes a lot of administrative costs and hassle, and everybody thinks at the end of the day, is this worth it or not? One of the things that we are finding is that there are a lot of people in this country who are high net worth individuals who at the moment aren't adequately advised on what would be considered some of the more interesting EIS and SEIS opportunities. And the reason they're not getting that service is because many of the advisors are not concentrating on this area of the market, and part of that is probably due to the fact that it's not a big part of their business, but the other point is to actually understand and feel technically competent in this area is a challenge, and this is something that we at Hardman can help with. So I'm now going to flip on to the next slide and just tell you a little bit about who Hardman is, because we are far more than a company that's involved in the tax-enhanced space. In fact, our roots are in the public markets. We have a list of over 40 public companies that we write research for, and we distribute this very, very widely. And we were asked to come into the EIS market a couple of years ago, mainly because of the issues that we're seeing today, is that there is more education that's going to be required to make advisors more competent, if you like, to to sell the products that they have the investment opportunity that the providers hope that they do present. So our business is really structured looking at the regulatory environment and trying to work out where the bottlenecks, where the problems, where the issues are. So that's why we entered the market a couple of years ago. And these are basically the services we offer. So we have our traditional services on the far side, which is quoted company work. We also do consultancy work as well. So we're very active in valuing businesses, doing due diligence. We do due diligence for our European Stock Exchange. We do expert witness work. But the tax enhanced space, which is the bit that we're interested in over here, is we do the investment research. We also have started doing IFA training as well to get people up to speed with what MiFID II means for their business, and also we've started doing work on panel selection. And at this point, I'm going to introduce you to Vilma, this is Vilma's CV on the screen here. Vilma's going to take you through TR 16.1 and other regulatory issues, and then I'm going to come back and give you a quick chat at the end about how we should pull this all together from a practical point of view.
Right, good morning everyone, thank you very much. I realise no one's yet said my surname, so let's just stick to Vilma. I think that's the easiest way. So I'm going to spend maybe about 10 minutes or so trying to brighten up your day, talking about MiFID II, some of the regulations, what the FCA is trying to do in this area, and just cover those aspects. So just to start with due diligence, obviously Mark's already touched upon it, but with regards to the IFA community, I think what we talk about when we talk about due diligence is really the due diligence before making a personal recommendation. So it's stating the obvious, but it's actually making a comprehensive assessment of your clients, of their risk profiles, of their current financial situation, of their objectives, and then at the same time looking at the market, looking at the products available and how the two match. So I think that's what we're really looking at when we talk about due diligence with regards to the IFA community. Now, attitudes to due diligence. So Richard touched upon this as well. There are a couple of different points of view really in terms of research and due diligence. I think the first one, it's an essential step in the process of allocating your client's assets appropriately. Another thought is that it's an essential exercise, but it's carried out by third parties, so third-party reviewers or someone else working in the market. Or it's only something that comes really to the fore of your mind when things go wrong and you have to think about how to blame someone else but not yourself. So really it's what Mark said, is perhaps having that audit trail to be able to say what it is that you've done and how you've carried out the due diligence. I think what I'd like to show in the next couple of slides is that where the regulations both through MiFID II, the original MiFID in 2007, to MiFID II, FCA papers consultation, where it's pointing to is that, of course, due diligence and research is supposed to be a core essential step in the process of doing the personal recommendations and aligning your assets, your client's assets appropriately. It definitely shouldn't be something that, as the saying goes, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It shouldn't be that approach. It should be an active approach in trying to carry that out for your clients. So here are a few examples, starting with MiFID, the original one, MiFID I, as we can relate to it, implemented in the UK in November 2007. And again, Richard touched upon this. It was really to increase competition in the market, in the investment firms and across the EU. It was to do with harmonisation of EU laws in investment firms. And it was also about transparency. It was trying to help the consumer. It's about consumer protection. We then had the RDR, which I'm sure you all know about because it was one of the biggest changes for financial advisors and retail advice. And I think what that showed as well, it was, in our opinion, you know, a follow-through of MiFID. It was about protection of consumers. It was about fair pricing, and it was making sure that both the clients and the advisors' interests were aligned. So that was RDR in sort of 2012, beginning of 2013. We had a couple of FCA fact sheets. There are plenty of these around on the website, but these are ones specifically referring to the RDR that came out in 2012. So there was some further guidance issued by the FCA in terms of appropriateness, suitability, research, due diligence, following the RDR legal framework. And then the next two, TR16.1, which Mark mentioned, and CP29.6, which you don't need to remember. But those are the two main points that we're going to quickly touch upon. And then obviously MiFID II is coming in January 2018. So FCA thematic review TR16.1, that was released last year in February. And Mark mentioned that really what it was looking at was the FCA did a market review. It did a market review on about 13 advisory firms. It also spoke to just over 5 or 6 product providers and research and due diligence providers in the market with regards to how advisors carry out due diligence, with regards to how advisors look at this area and what processes they have in place. Whether you're an independent or whether you work for an advisory firm. So that was the scope of their research or the market review. A couple of key quotes that I've picked out here. The poor quality of an advisory firm's research and due diligence is one of the 3 root causes for poor consumer outcomes. Now, I've just touched upon MiFID, RDR, MiFID II. The essence is about consumer protection. It is about transparency. It is about aligning the interests of the advisor and the client. And clearly, what the FCA found is that is not necessarily happening at the moment with regards to research and due diligence. Another one here you can read, we were disappointed to identify issues relating to platform research and due diligence, particularly having previously published our expectations around this topic. And the reason why we picked out this quote is this refers to those fact sheets in the previous slide, which refers to RDR, which refers to MiFID. And the point that that we're making is that it has always been in the legal framework, you know, consumer protection, advisory firms, due diligence, research. And I think what we're seeing is that the FCA is still not necessarily satisfied with what's happening in the market. Having said that, there were some good practices in place, and we've got some copies of this report, so you can pick that up on the way out. There were some good practices, there were some positive outcomes, but I think the conclusion to draw is that there is still a little bit more to be done, perhaps. So here it's just delving a little bit more into what's actually in the report, what is research and due diligence in the FCA's point of view. Competence, I'd really like to touch upon that, because what we believe competence is and adequately competent on the subject of the product or service is about having the right education. It's about being up to date, both in the regulatory landscape and with news, what's going on with the product providers, what's going on with the service providers. It is being competent in those areas. Which is also why, for example, you have the CPD requirements, which is why you have to have a standing professional qualification requirement. All of these are part of being competent in your area and therefore being able to carry out the research and due diligence and advise your clients appropriately. Research and due diligence, again, this is their specific definition of it. So the nature of the investment, understanding that, its risks and benefits, and understanding the provider. And I would like to touch upon the topic of scoring here, because what we believe is essential is understanding the investment case, it's understanding the investment risks, and therefore matching it to your client's profile. It's not about picking up a report, having a third-party provider, whether it's ourselves or someone else, and just reading our opinion. It is about understanding what the underlying investment case is and how that matches your client's profile. I think that's really, really key to mention. And assessing suitability, once you're adequately competent, so to speak, you've done the research and due diligence, you are then able to recommend to your client a suitable and appropriate investment. There was more to come from the Oh, hang on. Sorry, apologies. One more slide there. So just to conclude, I won't read all of this because it's quite lengthy and we can send this over to you. But I already mentioned it. Really what the thematic review found last year was that whilst there were some good practices, there were some advisory firms and IFAs that were carrying out the right procedures, I still feel the FCA saying we are still lacking in this process. We are still lacking in exactly doing the adequate research and due diligence. And, Mark touched upon it. It's not necessarily just having third-party reviews and other opinions, but as an advisor, coming to your own professional conclusion and advising your client. And this is where there was more to come from the FCA. So in the thematic review, they did mention that they are going to publish a follow-on paper. This is specifically in relation to MiFID II. So the other one was a separate review that they did in the research and due diligence market. This is now talking a bit more specifically with MiFID II, and there's about 5 of these consultation papers. They have now issued the first policy statement, which in essence basically talks about, what the MiFID II regulation is actually going to look like, what the articles are going to include. And the second one is due this June, if you're interested in reading those. But they are about 400 pages each. So just FYI, I have here put the Chapter 7 and Chapter 8 as the most relevant ones for you. So this talks about suitability and appropriateness with regards to IFAs, with regards to giving retail advice. And again, it's reiterating the same point it made in the thematic review last year. That there's a suitability assessment, and this time you really have to, stating the obvious, have to do the due diligence and the comprehensive assessment of your client. You have to do the profiling, you have to do the hard facts, the soft facts. You have to understand your client's situation and objectives as best as you can. An interesting quote there, which we picked out from that, is that no personal recommendation should be made or decision to trade be taken if none of the services or investments are suitable for the client. And the point I'd like to make here is that tax relief, which obviously tax enhanced investments, EIS, VCT, SEIS is all about, should not be a sole decision as to why you would recommend an investment to your client. And therefore, if a product is not suitable, don't recommend it. That is what the FCA is saying, in our opinion. And Chapter 8, again, it's appropriateness. In a way, I think that they're somewhat similar, whether the product is suitable and appropriate, and it's also covered in COBS 10, which is the FCA handbook. So all it's doing, MiFID II consultation paper, it's just giving a bit more clarity as to where it applies and how it applies. But it already is in the COBS 10 handbook. And then I'm going to hand back over to Richard. Thank you. Oh, you've got yours.
I've got mine. Thank you very much. Okay, so by now, if you're an advisor, you might start to feel slightly uncomfortable that you might have to understand some things that you haven't actually necessarily had to have in-depth knowledge of before. And the reference to scoring in reviews that some people do, we don't believe that scoring is appropriate, and we can discuss this afterwards if you like. The world is basically changing, and we think you need a higher level of research and due diligence done on many of the products in the market just to comply with MiFID II. So advisors really have to work out how they need to spend their time and what they need to know. And one of the issues we keep coming up against is people go, well, no one told me, or I didn't know. Well, ignorance is really no defense in anything. So, but we're going to try to explain how we might be able to make that less of an issue. And I think the basic thing, any professional person should basically act like a reasonable person, especially when it comes to approaching their job and other people's money. And what would a reasonable person do or be expected to know in any one particular situation, given the resources that he has available to him? And the other point is, if people are uncertain, they should actually ask questions. We'll go back onto this a bit later, but a lot of people say, well, there wasn't any information available. How was I meant to know the answer to this? Well, the answer is you should ask somebody who can possibly help you. Right, so if you are now a very good financial advisor, but you are faced with investment opportunities that maybe you probably need to feel more comfortable with. There are a number of ways that you might look at a proposition that comes across your desk. You'd obviously look at the risk and reward, you'd look at the business proposition, you'd look at the investment processes that would be deployed by the fund manager. You would obviously look at their management records, you could look at what they've done in the past, you could look at who these people are, you could look at all sorts of things. But you also, at the end of the day, you really want to work out the division of reward and also the other side of it, if things don't go so well, the absorption of losses. So when you think about the whole process, you've got your client's benefits that should accrue from a successful investment. You've also got to realise that other people in the chain need to be rewarded as well. And if things go wrong, the other way around, are you going to absorb, or are you going to be at risk of absorbing more than your fair share of losses? So you need to also look at the structure of these funds as well. And so by the time you get through that, you should start having a degree of confidence in the investment processes as opposed to just understand what they are. And then we go on to another topic which we can spend a bit more time on later if you like, which is conflicts of interest, which can occur in a number of forms and are often very difficult to spot unless you spend a lot of time looking at situations or you really understand what the issue is. And then finally, we go back again to the division of the reward versus the risk. Is this actually an appropriate and suitable investment for the client? As I just repeat what I just said, is do not accept weak answers to questions and inquiries. So the way we look at funds and the way we look at our research products is we do all the work that was stated on the previous page. That doesn't mean to say we take the risk away from you or any responsibility in that sense away from you, but we do produce very in-depth reviews with very experienced staff. So we look at fund objectives, we look at the business case, we look at management experience, we look at conflicts of interest, we look at risk management. We have a whole process. So by the time we write a review, if you read the review, it does give you a very good synopsis of what we, as an independent firm, believe to be the case. And if we then go on to some concluding remarks, you've got to maintain the reasonable person stance. You've got to be aware of regulatory changes. It's a mistake, I think, to try to be an investment guru. A lot of people should apply the general principles of investment as opposed to trying to be experts in every single subsector of the market. It's definitely not possible. You should start having a mental checklist when you look at an investment proposition in your head. Case studies are quite a good way of gaining knowledge. Some companies will provide you with case studies. You can understand how the process works. Stay grounded, which is obvious. Everyone gets very excited about new products from time to time. The market changes its psychological attitude quite a lot. Don't assume that when Brexit is completed that the rules will become more relaxed. We just don't think that's a wise stance. And finally, to go back to our favourite piece of thematic review, TR16.1, it's very short. It's worth reading it again and understanding it. And if you have any questions, then I'm very happy to answer them. Or I will now hand over to Paul. Hello.
Having had a conversation with our MiFID team in-house, they asked me ask a question around purchasing of research. They believe that the FCA is moving towards a position where companies get research for their due diligence process, research process, third-party research, that is. They have to pay for that, for it to be valid in there from an FCA point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And so can't be given research bought by the promoters, then you treat it as an editorial almost.
Mm-hmm.
So my question is,
Yes, okay.
How do you work with that within your...
Well, I suppose you can draw two parallels in life. You can draw parallels with auditing. You can draw parallels with the bond rating agencies. In both cases, and a company pays its auditors to do an audit on itself, and in bond rating, as we all know, the same thing happens again with Moody's or whoever. So we don't think it's an issue, providing we as a firm are independent in our opinion, and we make it very clear to people when we are engaged by public companies or anybody else that yes, if you want a review done, you can correct any factual errors in the work that we do, but that's it. We basically will either publish the report, or we won't publish the report, but we will only accept comments, if you like, on the factual accuracy, just in case we've made a mistake.
Sorry, what I meant was from a buyer point of view, or a consumer of your research point of view, our MiFID team thinks that I'm buying the research from you as opposed to getting it from you for it to be usable within my own research process. That's our MiFID.
Right. Okay, so
I'm wondering whether you've got a thought about that.
at the moment, we haven't had to address that issue, but I can completely understand why the payer for the research would come from the other side of the street. I mean, we're looking at it in the public market world with the falling off of research in the public from stockbrokers. How's that going to be paid for in future? Fund managers have a budget. It's certainly not going to go the way it was spent before. It's not come up, your question has not come up as an issue yet, but somebody in the chain somewhere will have to pay for the research because there's going to have to be independent reviews done. So I can't really say any more than that. We certainly haven't charged anybody on your side of the street, so to speak. We have just basically taken on projects on a prescribed basis. This is exactly what we will do and provide, but it could change in a year or so. It quite easily could.
If I may just add on that as well, I think in the public markets, what we've been talking to a lot of brokers and companies is with regards to pooled research and the fact that that's going to become more transparent in terms of how it's paid for. And what's happening in the public markets is that there are some fund managers out there who have started to say that they're going to take that cost out of their P&L. There are some fund managers that haven't taken a stance yet. And our understanding, at least my understanding, is that there are no clear guidelines yet. There are no clear guidelines, there are no clear statements. MiFID II is still in the process of being finalised. I know it's, we're 6 months away from it and they expect all firms to comply, but they themselves haven't actually written or set the rules. So I think taking it into the private market, I think first the public markets are going to have to take their stance and see what the fund managers and how the research area is going to plan out, and only then, in a way subsequent to that, are we going to look at the private markets and how the research with regards to IFAs consuming it are going to work. But as such, I don't think there are clear guidelines yet, but it's certainly a topic of conversation.
I guess one can also suggest that the due diligence need to be done on yourselves in terms of the process if you're acting as a natural intermediator to
Yes.
assure the person who receives it that you are indeed.
Yes. Yes, I mean we are fully compliant. We're under an FCA umbrella. We've got very stringent processes. We've got extremely experienced staff. I mean we're not a 1 or 2 or 3 man business. We are quite a substantial research business. This happens to be an area that we think is interesting where we can deploy our skills.
So that's actually an interesting point, partly because there's due diligence that goes on all the way through. I'll come on to what due diligence the fund manager does. But on the other previous point, from the fund manager point of view, it does seem a little bit odd that there's different reviewers who have different payment structures. So some cases the IFA is paying for the review, in some cases it's the fund manager paying for the review. Is this going to work? No, not for the moment. Russell, can you go and see? So,
Remind me later.
yes. But I can probably do most of it. Russell, do you want to go and see and find the... Anyway. Paul Mattick from Mercia. I can probably do most of it without slides. So I bit under scrutiny here. Seems we've got reviewers and IFAs and now a fund manager, and it seems like the last two speakers have set me up very, very nicely for to go through a process and try and be chastised at the end. Effectively, what I wanted to run when this is possible is to show you that the sort of things that we recognise, that the fund manager recognises that you need to see from your due diligence point of view, so for the reviewer or IFA wants to see from the fund manager, but also then looking at the due diligence which we do onto the investee companies. So we are an early stage technology investor, have 337 million under management, and that's growing quite quickly. We have capital from various different pools, ranging from government money, so we run some of the regional growth funds. We also have pension capital and EIS and SEIS capital. So we're quite a well-established company. Mercia originally was set up in the 1980s, and it's been evolving over the last 30 years, and we've been built, especially the last kind of 24, 36 months, it's built to, I think, quite substantial, and excellent, we got there. So I think we can probably skip through the first few things. So I'm talking on this at the moment. So set up in the 80s, our top co is actually AIM listed, and it's around 125 million market cap, so it's a sort of entity that someone can look at and look into in some depth. So from a DD point of view, when you're looking at Mercia, you should be able to see all the way through it, hopefully. You can see, if you want to look at the annual report, you could actually see the CEO's salary, that sort of level of transparency. So that's the thing which actually is quite important, because I think for other managers, EIS managers, it's a very opaque situation where you put your money into basically a dark pit, and it comes out hopefully at the end with some appreciation, and the EIS tax certificates coming along the way. As I say, we run various different pools of capital from government, regional growth funds, pension funds, university endowments, all sorts of different pots of money. Quite a big company, 60 plus investors, investment staff and support staff, 6 offices. It's actually more like 8 at the moment and growing quite quickly. Deal flow, this was mentioned by Mark. So a lot of the points that I was going to bring up was mentioned by Mark in his presentation, and that's not a bad thing for me at all. So deal flow is one of the obvious ones, and we'll come on to that later on how we deal with it. Personally, Mercia is a regional investor. We do this for value. So we see a lot of capital being deployed into the southeast. So on this report, it's about £3 billion coming into the southeast, into early stage technology, whereas the rest of the country's got £1 billion. So we think there's some value to be had outside of the southeast. We have a number of offices and university partners spread across the Midlands and North. So 18 universities on the left, but we have actually most of our deal flow, we'll go on to the details, actually comes from our investment directors' networks. So it's their commercial experience which is more relevant for our deal flow sources. So we have a big university partnership, but most deals come through the investment directors into 4 sectors, and we'll come on to why those 4 sectors in a minute. Our model is to be able to fund companies from very early stage all the way through. So we can do grants, even very early stage grants. We can do seed, so CDIS, which may not be appropriate for your clients, for IFA's clients. But and then we talk about going to EIS, growth capital, and hopefully to the exit. For each stage, we have different pots of capital we can use. So grants, we can supply. We don't do many of them, but we can. It tends to be university spin-outs. Then we can provide SEIS capital, tends to be from private investors. EIS coming in from IFAs normally. Our top co, which is wholly owns Mercia Fund Management, can then provide its balance sheet capital, which means these little technology companies of different sectors can come to us, and they can keep getting capital from different sources at different stages. So we can put 5 or 10 million from the balance sheet. Actually, if needs be, we can deploy larger amounts. If our institutional shareholders want to participate, we can deploy larger amounts than that as well. But that's attractive from a company's. So there's lots of different types of due diligence. So obviously the reviewers, so we have various people who reviewed us. So we've got Alan Bridge, MyCap, Harbin's obviously the best, that's why they're here today. It's a very good process. But they're quite keen to look at Mercia, but from a company point of view, and we'll come on to why in a minute, this is very interesting for a company. So if a little tech company wants to grow really big, has great ambitions, seeing that we can provide a full range of capital means that they don't need to go elsewhere. So we're not going to guarantee to fund them all the way, but if they do well and they keep hitting their targets, we're likely to provide follow-on capital. And that's something which makes the company's due diligence on us, they look at us and think that's quite an attractive partner, a funding partner. And the exits, yeah, they come. It does take some time. Early stage tech is one of the areas which, yes, 5-7 years is realistic. In some cases, more.
Do all your investee companies end up getting some support from Topco balance sheet?
No. So it's very selective. It's got to be on their own investment decision. So Mercia Fund and Mercia Tech are separate entities in their investment process. If the Mercia Fund company is doing really well, Mercia Technologies will look at it. As their board will decide whether they'll invest. They are separate entities, and that's one of the risks, which it's obviously an intrinsic risk.
So do some go straight from EIS to exit?
Yes.
And where you do get involved at Topco balance sheet level, what's the dilutive effect to it?
Well, obviously, Topco doesn't want to dilute the fund too much because that's providing a deal flow. So it tends to be on relatively friendly terms, the valuation which Topco invests at. It is external, but obviously they're not going to bite off the hand that gives them deal flow. And there is a relationship there, which again we'll come on to. So, EIS industry, an overview, you'll know this already, as asset-backed or low risk, or whatever you want to call it, limited life, and then there's technology companies. This is fundamentally changing towards the more growth EIS over the last couple of years. Solar panels being taken off qualification. This is all something we all know. The thing I want to focus on is the diversification. So with asset-backed, low-risk EISs, yes, so you could potentially have one company, maybe a project finance, maybe 2 or 3, and be relatively secure, just because these companies are inherently not that likely to fail because they've got long-term cash flows, contractual revenues, etc. But so diversification in that situation, maybe not so relevant. When it comes to technology companies, these especially early stage tech, they will fail. There will be a proportion of companies which will fail, and it depends what percentage is subject to how good the manager is in stock selection and active management. I mean, on the board, your involvement, the risk mitigations you put in place to try and avoid the company going bust. But from our point of view, we actually want some of the companies to go bust because it means that we're investing at the right stage early enough to get a really high return. If some other AIS providers and technology space it's far more concentrated. So you might have 3 to 7, say 3 or 4 companies, and if one of them goes bust, then that's a massive impact on your portfolio. And yes, there's loss relief, and you get tax reliefs as well. But as Mark said, and Wilma said, it should be about an investment rather than just about tax reliefs. And that's something which the HMRC is progressively moving the industry towards. So 3 to 7, is that diverse enough? We don't think so. We create quite broad early stage technology portfolios of 15 companies around there, and hopefully within that you'll see 2, 3, 4 who actually do really well. And then there'll probably be a similar number within 3 years that probably fail. And then the rest, over the next subsequent few years, you'll see how the portfolio splits. And ultimately, there's going to be either successes or failures. There should be no zombie companies, and that's something which the industry needs to avoid, but we do see happening quite a lot, which is the dark pit in which money goes in and doesn't come out. But so we create broad portfolios, and this actually has so far we're seeing at least 1 or 2 companies, normally 3 or 4 per fund, which are doing 3 to 5x. So decent multiples on cost. So, fine. What is more important here is more about our deal flow, and you want to know a bit about what the reason I'm presenting actually is how we look at these portfolio companies and our due diligence process on the companies in which we are investing into. So, creating that broad technology company portfolio. Those 4 sectors you saw briefly earlier on. The reason we focus on those 4 sectors, so life sciences, digital, software, which is everything, and advanced engineering effectively, is because of our 4 investment directors who are experts in those areas. They are commercial guys who have sold companies for 50 million, that sort of level, or the CEO of Sega. So they know these industries really well, and they can do their own, and they don't even need to do due diligence because they already understand the sectors with such depth. They can see inherently that's going to be a good company. We'll look at that. We'll maybe move it slightly, or we'll help that company introduce. So there's a lot of value we can add there. So we do bring in external consultants where required to do DD for us in specific sectors, but we like these areas because we know them, and that's our own DD. Going from the left to right, don't ignore the words on the left at the moment because they're so small it's ridiculous. Per company, per year, we see around, at the moment, about 2,000 companies, opportunities, and that's growing quite quickly. The exact number is, it's varying on a week-by-week on a rolling basis, but it's going up quite quickly. It was 1,600 when we quoted it last annual report, and I think it's actually closer to 2,500 at the moment, but there's strong reasons for that, and I'll mention that later on. But basically, we have a very precise DD process and investment protocol. We have, from the point of inquiry through to investment, at the summary level, 1% get through. So we invest about 20 companies for Mercia growth funds each year, and coming around from 2000. So there's 99% just stripped away in that process. And most of it actually is in the initial few phases, and we'll go through the phases in a minute. After that, we have the ability to deploy follow-on capital, as I mentioned, and from the balance sheet. And hopefully, the plan is to get all the companies to exit either a write-off or a good exit. That's the plan. On the right, there's those very small words, and this is the deal flow sources. We'll run through, especially, again, we'll focus on number 3, the investment directors networks, because that's where we see the majority of our deals coming from. And that, I wouldn't be surprised if that's a bit of a surprise to you guys, because we have university partnerships. We have quite a few of them. But obviously, these are very early companies. These are university spin-outs, there's seed, the EIS, and they take a bit of coaxing, a bit of work on the board. But we also have other sources. So we have coming directly to us. We see quite a few companies who just pitch to us, and I get emails every day saying, this is an idea, does it work, would you invest in it? Some of them are spammy, but in fact, a lot of them are spammy, but some are real ones. But they don't tend to be high quality approaches. So the highest quality is from the investment directors networks and our investment team more broadly. We can also invest alongside some of our other funds, which we manage. We manage regional growth funds, which is the Northern Powerhouse. We've got £108 million to invest in the north, which is great. And that we have the ability to deploy EIS capital alongside that, which means if we've already invested in the company, we can see some DD at first hand by sitting on the board. But the regional incubators, yeah, that does provide some deal flow. Advisors, so corporate finance especially, we get a decent amount of introduction from corporate finance. But the corporate finance and investment directors, that they are our main quality sources. So 2,000 companies come through. Right, this is quite a lot of detail on the slide, hence the sequential. So when we first received the proposition, we would first do a call or a meeting, probably with maybe 50%. So there's a big chunk which is taken out before that. If they're not in our space, if they're too late stage, so we have some quite strict requirements just to get to even the first step. So out of the 2,000 that arrive, probably 1,000 get to that top step, because if the valuation is too high, that's normally the problem, to be honest. We won't invest in anything which has got a higher than 5 million valuation to start with. We then follow on with capital subsequently. So probably top line, 1,000 companies get to that stage. Meeting, call, see if they fit with investment criteria, just digging a bit more to see if they actually do, rather than just the pitch deck we looked at. Then meet the whole company, especially CEO, CTO, just to make sure that they're credible. So we invest in people ultimately, because ideas are, yeah, they're fine, but serial entrepreneurs are something which is really valuable. They know what mistakes they have made previously and they avoid them. And that's something the UK is not as good at as the US, certainly. So meeting the management team is really, obviously, it's pretty important for us because we're very active investors. Go through the business plans in detail, and this is something which, of course, the DD, that's a pretty basic part of DD, and we have some very sophisticated guys who with all sorts of different qualifications and running through those business plans, financials. Right, then making an offer, that can take a while, and lots of negotiation around that price point, and that's the valuation tends to be one of the sticking points. That's what we do. We make sure we're coming in early and then follow. Then go into some more detailed DD, and DD can easily take 3 months, and from point of first engagement to cash in the bank. And that's the kind of timescale that we would expect from any approach to us. That's the timescale is realistic. We can do it quicker. We can do it, if we're not sure, we'll do it a bit slower and look at the company, see how they progress. But it's looking at the entire scope, really. So looking at going from the different contracts, and then for more detailed assessments, the strategy, the regulatory environment, M&A. So the whole scope of the company. And so we get really close to it. And with the guys who are already in the sectors, they can do that quite quickly and easily. Then legals can take a while as well, especially complicated with EIS and all the regulation changes and action. So, and then obviously then it's completion, fine. Actually, the thing that's always forgotten is ongoing support, but that's something which we are really big at, is we get on the board and we get active. And that is actually probably one of the best elements of due diligence, is we put small amounts of money in and then sit on the board and look at them and see how good they are. And if they're good and they're hitting their targets, we will follow. And I think having some cash in the business is one of the best due diligences you can get from our point of view. And it means that we might risk a small amount, but then we can follow on with some more substantial amounts. Good example, this is one of the companies that in our portfolio. So what Mike Hayes I mentioned earlier on, he's the ex-CEO of Sega. He saw this company and thought that's a good gaming company. He decided to invest a small amount of money, put 250k in from EIS Capital, and he basically pivoted the company into augmented reality, virtual reality, which was going to be the future 2-3 years ago, and now it is. And it's coming on, and you're seeing lots of releases, and they're right at the forefront of this. So Mike's had a massive amount of value to the board. But more than that, Mercia has drip-fed capital with them, and this one, the balance sheet, has invested and built out our position quite substantially. So from Dream's point of view, working with us was great, because we had both the value add from Mike Hayes, but also the ability to follow on with capital. Quickly go through this, because this is ultimately what people want to see. Is DD is all about, in the end, both our DD and external panel and reviewers, is about performance nexus. It's about returning cash to investors. We've had quite a few funds and some successes. This is especially, actually, this point down here. So our funds are doing reasonably well. They're early stage, and this is unquoted, so past performance is not a reliable indicator of future returns, etc. But there's good uplifts and across the EIS funds. But having cash back, starting to have cash back just after 3 years, I think that is something which not enough people would show. There's very few fund managers, I think, would publish this on their website, and I think more should. And if they're not, you've got to, as Mark was saying, why aren't they? They should be, because they want. You should be able to show this and live up to your performance. And that's one of the things that reviewers do, is they can dig through this and they can actually present this in a standard way across different companies, different fund managers, and that's really valuable for both the IFA, for us as well, actually. But getting that cash back is the point, and having the only way to get cash back is either stock market listings or trade sales, M&A, and we actually have another mechanism, but I'm not going to go into that. But just a couple of examples: we sold a linear. Actually 26x in December for the fund, 21 for the balance sheet. So this is a company in which the balance sheet followed on. We've got 21x selling to ARM. And then, in fact, we had an even bigger partial sale recently, in which this company is in a very high, fast-moving space and robotics. It listed on AIM last year, just over 12 months ago. It's currently valued around 585 million. We own 15%. We've already taken out 13 million from the company. We only put 1 million in the first place. So this obviously is the sort of thing that every fund is looking for. And that having some track record, having big exits, or the ability to deliver big exits, is something which is very important, both from a DD point of view, from the reviewers and IFAs. Seeing those sort of returns, hopefully, is what you guys are looking for. But DD, from us, as I say, that there is lots of different types of DD. There's a company that does DD on us to make sure they want to work with us. There's our DD on the company. But then, of course, there's the IFAs and the reviewers that due diligence on Mercia. And we have, let's say, reports from Allen Bridge Hub and MiCap at the moment. And I think they form an integral part of the industry. And I just want to thank both actually Mark and Harbin for being here and presenting alongside me. And I think from that, I am done and pass over back to Russell for concluding remarks.
Thank you, Paul. Right, we'll come back to the learning objectives. Hopefully, we can put a tick in those boxes. So hopefully you have gained a better understanding of MiFID II and its implications as far as advisor concerned in terms of due diligence, the situation as far as independent reviews goes, and consider some of the sort of risk mitigation factors. Okay, we've given Mercia's view of risk mitigation and what we do, so hopefully that's been beneficial. I picked up on something from Vilma's presentation that I think I need to mention. You mentioned competence, and something I'm surprised Mark didn't mention. As far as advisors are concerned, there is the EISA diploma. So perhaps that might be a good starting point, perhaps for people who are involved in this space, of maybe going through the EISA diploma. It's 10 hours of CPD-able study and an hour-long exam, unless it's changed since I did it. So I have actually done it myself, so I would strongly recommend that to advisors, and that's a means of demonstrating, or partially demonstrating, your competence in that area as far as EIS is concerned. My job really is sort of very easy. As I said, a few minutes at the start, and finally just to wind up. So I'd like to thank, first of all, sort of Mark for coming along, Richard and Vilma from Hardman, and Paul for joining us from my colleague from Mercia. Big thank you for coming along and attending and spending some of your very valuable time with us today, and I hope it's been valuable. And any feedback would be gratefully appreciated in terms of whether we should be running these events going forward, and any changes we should perhaps make in terms of duration, topics, venue, etc. And finally, just can I throw it open to the floor? Any questions for any of our presenters?
There is an external committee. There's priority lists, so we have a stated priority for different funds in different regions, different sectors. So it is complicated, but that there is a policy which is there's a conflicts committee above that as well. Actually, I've got a question. So, in a post-MiFID II world, how do we see that the reviewing is actually going to change? And so, also there's the price point, whether it's who is paid for by, but also it's obviously going to give you more depth. But you mentioned some scoring processes as well. Are they viable in a post-MiFID II world?
So I think I can answer that from my opinion. I think with regards to scoring in particular, there are no regulations or indications that it's going to become no longer legitimate, or that it's not going to have a place in the market as such. So there isn't anything in MiFID II or the regulatory framework to say that that is not going to be an aspect anymore. However, what Mark touched upon is it's if you are relying on some kind of mechanism which shows you an element of risk, whether it's scoring, whatever it might be, you have to know how that score or that element has been come to, how the conclusion has been made. And I think one of the difficulties in the market at the moment is that there is not enough transparency as to how this conclusion is made. So I think, there can be perhaps scoring elements, there can be, risk scales, whatever it might be. But the most important thing is to actually know how it was made, what was assessed, and how it was concluded. So that's what I could say to that.
So some elements are factual, such as you might want to look at fees and say they're factually comparable between various funds, for example, if life were that easy. And other things are subjective, and it's a subjectivity issue. I've given a score of 12 for the management. Well, what does that actually mean? It's very, very hard. So all we can see is that basically the regulation, the MiFID II is getting the advisor closer and closer to the client, and basically therefore more general scoring mechanisms or assessments are becoming that you still have to have reviews done, but basically it's that personal relationship between the investor and the advisor that is the closest point, and therefore is scoring generally applicable? Is it too broad brush anyway, even if you could understand it and track it and measure it? And it has to be obviously applied consistently as well, not only from time frame to time frame, but across all the spectrum of funds as well. So it's a very difficult thing to do, to provide scoring that makes any sense. And scales of scores that are all around a certain one or two numbers, whether they're 85, 6, 4 or 3 or 9, I think things will change. It's whether the scoring is actually it will be different in the future. I think that's the answer. You won't just be able to have that weight of emphasis on a number.
Thank you, Richard. Gentleman over there.
Yeah, we're seeing the emergence of platforms, private direct-to-consumer platforms.
Yes.
Promoting EIS opportunities and SEIS opportunities. We're also seeing advisory platforms which claim to obviously provide research, due diligence, that advisors need to provide a sort of, if you like, automated process for selecting certain EISs that you can put the client money into. What's the opinion from today's speakers about that particular sector, which seems to be developing and attracting a lot of funds?
I think that's the point. It's a very emergent industry.
Startup almost, part of the industry. So it's real fragmented at the moment. So you see a lot of different platforms and all trying to do different things, and there's some that do a whole host of research and diligence and do some really good stuff, and there's some at the other end of the scale as well, and there's everything in between. So I think the difficulty for advisors, for you guys at the moment, is trying to pick which ones are going to be the most appropriate ones to use. So we see people like Crown Cube who just literally plonk stuff on there and you can invest in it as you wish, and there's other stuff at the end of the other spectrum that's got some really great DD and research and work done behind it. So yeah, it's just trying to choose which one's going to be the best one to choose for your appropriate clients. But yeah, it's a new industry. I do have some concerns about it, particularly the crowdfunding platforms. The people investing £100, £200, do they actually understand what they're going into? And is this all going to be a shitstorm in 3 years' time when they try and get their money out and can't do? So I think that's a bit of a worry from that point of view. So the advisor platforms at this stage seem to be the better option or the better horse, because they have done that work in terms of research and diligence. So yeah, it's one to watch, but yeah.
And surely that conflicts in a way with what is being presented today, where you, as an advisor, are required to do your own. You don't think it's far from the line and so on.
Yeah, so when I say they've done their due diligence, you still need to go back and do your own and try and supplement it with that. But yeah, at least they have done some curation in terms of what goes on their platforms.
So it's not default to do.
Yeah, so the CrowdQ type crowdfunding actually platform model is give us your business plan, pay us some money, we stick it on there. Whereas some of the more advisor platforms will say, well, we'll have a look at it, see if it's okay, if it matches our criteria, we'll put it on, and then put it towards guys like yourselves.
Yeah,
So that model is probably a little bit more.
Add to that I do
Fleshed
agree. I
out.
don't think it's a default. I think it's an aid. I think a lot of what we're all doing here is to try and aid IFAs in the process of you making personal recommendations. And I think looking, both at the regulations of where the market's going, the fact that EIS is still quite a new market, especially for IFAs. There's not many IFAs involved in this market. There is a real big onus on IFAs and how much work you have to put in before making those recommendations. I mean, it's a tough job.
I take the point, but I think the way that some of the platforms are being promoted is that you
This is all you need.
This is all you need.
Absolutely, and
wrong.
that's again, I think, in my opinion, personal opinion, is where your job is quite tough, because you need to look, as in any market, there are going to be those that perhaps are very good at marketing and saying this is all you need and this is, we're doing everything for you. And then there's other players in the markets perhaps who over time and with experience you perhaps learn to trust or work with, and that's your sort of point of aid. But I agree with you. I'm definitely not saying that everyone in the market is basically doing the best of due diligence, and that's all you need. So yeah.
Tony, you had a question.
I did some platform research recently, and I ended up taking information from Platform, the Landcat, and RSMR. Now, obviously, I'd be delighted to use Hardman & Co. that has information for you, but I need to pay you for that. Well, how do you get paid?
Rebate.
This was the point that was brought up earlier. It's how, we know the research has to be done. The question is who's going to pay, and that's the big crossroads we have. It's the same crossroads in the public markets to some extent as well. All we know is the research has to be. If you were an advisor, you probably would want to have a highly skillfully prepared review that you could consult. We're not telling you what to do. There are very few people in the country who probably got the ability and the scope of analytical skills and workforce that we have. So every senior analyst has to have 20 plus years experience in their particular sector. So you're getting in really high quality input. At the moment, I don't think what we charge for it in this market is probably the economic rate, but we have another business and we know this is a growth industry and we know there are some extremely interesting providers that are entering the market that need recognition, and they need somebody to say yes, it does what it says on the tin.
I think to answer your question directly, our model at the moment is that for IFAs the reviews are, we don't charge them. There is no subscription models, there is no fees. We are paid by the companies, by the funds or the managers, whatever it is. So you can freely go on our website right now and see all the reviews that we've done in the tax and arts market in the past 12 months, or for as long as their licensing rights are operating. So as a matter of fact, we are operating under a slightly different business model. And obviously there are subscription models, which is mostly how the IFA market and the EIS products work. But with us at the moment, it's available to all.
We're quite interested to hear Mark's opinion on that, because, as I said before, there are the reviewers. There are effectively two that we pay for and two that IFAs pay for. And the two that IFA pays for are bigger at the moment. But what do you think about that conflict? Because it seems that obviously we prefer to work with people who we don't have to charge, we don't get charged by, and IFAs prefer, well, they don't actually currently, but you can imagine that IFAs might prefer to work with people who don't charge them.
I think it's one of those things where my personal opinion differs from my ESA opinion. So from an ESA point of view, all the reviewers are members, so it's hard to speak ill of any of them. So we're agnostic really. However the market decides how they want to pay and who pays, so be it.
What's your personal opinion?
Personal opinion is a different opinion. But yeah. So.
But it's just like the debt rating agencies, right? After 0809, they got investigated by governments because, for the obvious reason, that
Yeah.
if you're so confident, you know, they've been drawn up quite sharply, and I can't see why that wouldn't happen.
Yeah.
And if people get hurt, that's what they'll do. It's after the fact.
Okay, I think I'd better start to draw it to a close from a timing point of view. I think we're pretty close to the time that we said. A big thank you all for once again for coming. If there are any further questions, I'm sure all of the speakers and myself will be here to pick up on anything, but thank you very much for coming, and CPDs will be through via email? Yep. CPD certificates will be through on email. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. I've seen that happen before.